Hi, it's Abdul Karim Abdullah here again, Leslie. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And today I want to talk a little bit about the Federal Reserve, which is the United States Central Bank. You may have heard a lot about the Federal Reserve, an institution that was established in the early 1900s with the purpose of avoiding financial crises and generally stabilizing the financial situation in the country as a whole. The main purpose of the Federal Reserve is to regulate the interest rates in order to maintain stable prices and a low rate of inflation, and also sufficiently low interest rates to continue the economy, to create more jobs and to increase investment and to ensure economic growth. What many people are not too well aware of is that actually the Federal Reserve, despite the name that it has, federal, is actually not a federal institution at all. It is a private institution and it is owned by private banks like Bank of America and others. And now another thing to notice about the Federal Reserve is that it has the right to print money, actually an unlimited amount of money. So you might be wondering, why is it that the private banks have an institution at their disposal which can print money without limit? And not only that, which prints money without limit, but which also channels a lot of this money to the very institutions that control it, the private banks, like the Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and others. When that happens, that is normally called a bailout. And how does this work? Well, a bailout is actually very simple in principle. Whenever the banks who make loans experience problems and have a situation where people are unable to pay back their loans, the IOUs, or the certificates which the banks own from the people who borrow the money, become worthless or nearly worthless. So here comes the bailout. The bailout takes place when the private banks sell these worthless or nearly worthless certificates to the institution which they own, which is the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve pays them full face value of those loans. So they basically sell something worthless and get a full refund, the full value of the thing that became worthless while they were holding on to it. That's how the bailout works. Now, don't you think that is a fantastic arrangement? Well, for the banks it is, but what about ordinary citizens? Don't the taxpayers get to pay for this in some way or another? Actually, they do. The answer is they pay for it in the form of higher prices. And how do the higher prices happen? The higher prices normally result from an increase in the money supply, which takes place whenever the central bank prints money or buys securities or worthless securities from the private sector. So whenever the money supply increases in this way, what you see there is an increase in prices, and in turn this increase in prices will devalue the purchasing power of the currency and impoverish everybody, because everybody will have to pay higher prices and everybody's savings will diminish in value. So that's how it works. So then the next question that might be on your mind is, how is it that the private banks can get away with this kind of an arrangement? How can a law allow them to own an institution which is like a money machine, out of which they can print as much actually as they want? Of course, these bailouts are subject to congressional approvals and whatnot, but the banks have their representatives on Capitol Hill, and I recall reading in an article that on average they spend about $500 million lobbying on Capitol Hill to ensure that the laws that America has make it easy for the banks to survive and help them out in also special cases like financial crises. So once again, back to the question, how is it that they can get away with it, to have such an institution at their disposal, and nobody seems to be objecting? Actually, a few people are objecting, but their voices are few and far in between. I don't know, some people said that money talks and a lot of money talks loud. Maybe there is a problem there. that the link between the political donations by the financial sector and the legislation, perhaps that's where the problem is. So, to sum up, what I'm trying to say is that the central bank has been operating not only in the public interest in the form of stabilizing price levels by increasing or decreasing interest rates depending on the conditions that prevail at a particular time, but it has also been used as a bailout facility for private banks whenever these private banks get into trouble or whenever their liabilities suddenly exceed their assets. So, and the question that we are left with is, are we going to continue with an institution like that, or is there any chance that perhaps we should either abolish it or reform it or do something where this would not happen? Because as you know, in the rest of the private sector, if a business makes a mistake, they normally pay for it by suffering losses or going out of business altogether. And this also did happen, to be quite frank, to a few financial institutions like Lehman Brothers, but not all of them. Lehman Brothers was not saved in the last bailout, but Goldman Sachs was. And interestingly, Goldman Sachs, one of their former executives, was actually happened to be the senior official in the administration of the government at the time that asked for and approved the bailout for the financial sector, which was quite huge. So you have what is called a revolving door policy, where former employees of the banking institutions end up in a government, or government employees end up in a banking sector. Now, some people might call it a conflict of interest, but other people say, well, a person has to have a job once they retire, so why not go and work in a bank, or the other way around, go and work in a government if you have a good job over there. Still other people have proposed, like John F. Kennedy, that the central bank or the Federal Reserve be completely abolished. And that may be a good idea too. But I think if you do that, it should be combined with going back to the gold standard, where the currency will be backed by gold once again, as it was in the early 1970s. And this will prevent the central bank or any bank managing the money supply from printing an unlimited amount of money, which is not covered by any asset. So the twin solution to the problem presented by the Federal Reserve, and by implication all central banks in the world that operate on the basis of the same principles, the solution to the problem presented by such institutions, they're causing inflation and bailing out already wealthy shareholders of financial institutions. The solution to this is to abolish the central bank and also to adopt the gold standard as a new monetary system, where every currency or every dollar or whatever currency you use will be backed by a specified amount of gold. I think that should introduce some responsibility into the system and perhaps stabilize the system and prevent, if not prevent, at least reduce the likelihood of additional financial crises taking place in the future. So I think that's all. If you have any questions, you can write them in the comments below, and I will try, if I can, to answer them in the next video, inshallah. So that's all for today. Thank you for watching. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.